Next we're going to install a few safety measures. This one is actually the bottom switch, so when the lift is all the way at the bottom, it will toggle that switch and it will stop the lift. That's one. And we'll also have to have the upper limiter switch, which we have to mount on the top of the column where the motor is mounted on. And then we need to feed the cable back to the control unit. So when the lift goes up, it will actually toggle the switch and it will turn off the motor. Next is the control box. This is the box where you control the lift with up, down, lock and so on, emergency, etc. And in the back you'll find a couple of threaded holes, and that's how we're going to fix it to the pillar. Alright, so this is always a little bit of fiddling if you work on your own, but we got it in the spot and that's good. So now let's put the second screw in and then we should be good to go. So, control box is in place. And now we will continue with the cabling. Right, so we're going to install the lower limiting switch. And for that you have a little Phillips screw. You need to fit it from the back. Lock it in place. And here it is. The upper limiting switch has some adjustments. There is an in-bus here and an in-bus there, and you will need to adjust that once this limiter is on the column. And this is how it will be mounted in the column, vertical down. But when the lift moves up, it's going to hit this wheel, and as you can see, it's going to be tough to toggle it that way. So we need to move this arm a little bit. And you do that by untightening the in-bus, and then just give it a few turns. So you're sitting under an angle, and then we should be good. So now, when the lift comes up, it will push nicely. We may have to extend this arm as well, and that's what you do with this little screw here. Let me show you that. So now, see, we can now extend the arm as well. Where we need to set it, I don't know yet. We'll see that once it's installed. The cable will have to run in the back side, like so, and back to the control unit. And you can see now it's sitting in the proper position, and it will flip up as soon as the lift comes up. So now we need to remove the shields so we can run the cable inside the shield and then feed it through the hole back to the control panel. Now that we have all the mechanical parts installed and we don't need to mess around anymore inside the columns, we can grease the steel cables, and therefore use a good quality grease and just use your hands and go along with it and grease them really nice and smooth. Greasing the cables is a bit of a greasy job, but it has to be done. It's for your safety. So now we are about ready to start working on the electrical circuits on this lift. If you don't feel comfortable with electricity or electrical installations, then ask someone that knows about this. It's not complex, but still, if you are not comfortable, then I would say don't do it, because it's always about safety, and safety first. First of all, we're going to connect all the electromagnetic plungers on the columns. This one is in the middle. There is another one all the way on the top. And you'll have a wire coming out of the pillar, which is a loop, and you need to cut that wire. One side of this cable is coming from the top plunger, and the second one is going down to the other side of the bridge. So now we need to connect those cables together. So we stripped the wires, and now we're going to put the blue together with the blue wire and the brown one with the brown one. And we'll hook it up to one of those sugar cubes, as we call them. And we do the same with the brown wire. You can use other connectors if you want, but I like these because it's quite handy. Now all what's left to do is connect the wires from the solenoid to those sugar cubes, and we are done. And to keep it in place, we're going to use a little tie wrap. And that's it. And finally, we're going to put the cover up. And this is it. Now we will do the top one, and then I'll do the other side. exactly the same way. So the next thing to do is to install the lower limit switch and cable all that up. And therefore we have to remove the lid. I already removed the screw, so take that off. And in fact there is even a seal in there, so I removed that already. Now you have 4 contacts. The wire has to go between this one and that one. The reason for that is that it's a make-break contact, so depending on what you want to do. So if the lift is going down and it reaches the lower level, then you want to break the contact. We need to feed the cable through the housing, so it's sealed off. Already stripped the wires, and now we need to hook them up to the contacts. All right, and now it's time to connect the control box. And it's important that you connect the right cable to the right pin. And therefore, you should label all your cables. If you're not sure what cable is what, trace it down in the columns, find out what sensor it is, find out what electromagnet it is, and then label it, because you're going to need to know it on how to connect it to the inside of the box. You feed the cables through the bottom of the box, and there are some protected seals in there, so make sure that you feed it through. And have a look on the connection diagram itself. It's in the documentation. So if you open up the box, don't drop it. Instead, I'm going to tape it to the top with some paper tape, so that way it's out of the way and it cannot drop and it doesn't stretch the cables. Inside the control box, you will find the connection points for the different cables, and you need to feed the cables through these feeding holes. Your mains input, if it's a 220 lift monophase, it's ground, L1 and N. The electromagnet for the pressure relief on the oil pump is connected to YY. The top limiting switch is connected to AV. QQ is the connector for the electromagnets that will lock and unlock the bridge. And then you have D1, D2 and D3 and the ground. These are the leads going towards the power of your motor. Now in our case we only need the D1 because we only have one phase on the motor. We also have one phase of input, so we're going to use D1, and of course we also use D. AA is connected to the lower limiting switch. Remove the cover from the electromotor and hook up the cabling. I connected the solenoid for the pressure relief valve on the motor to the cable coming from the control unit. And I'm using just standard automotive connectors, as this is only 24 volts. Filling up the oil tank of the hydraulic pump requires hydraulic oil, and you're going to need about 10 liters of it. So once it's filled up all the way to the top, we can close it up, and then we do an overall inspection. If everything is tied down, all connectors are well sealed and connected, and then we can actually move ahead and start a dry run. So far we have installed the columns, we secured them down to the ground, we installed the cables, we installed the shuttles, we greased everything, we installed the control box, we cabled everything up, so now we are finally ready. Do a last minute inspection on all the elements that you did install, that everything is done correctly, because right now we're going to do a trial lift with this lift. Now, we're not going to put a car on it yet. First, we have still to do some adjustments and some verifications to make sure that everything is working properly. The shuttles have to move at the same time, and while they're moving up, you will hear the locking clicks, and they both should click at the same time. If they do not, then we'll have to readjust the cables. That's the first thing. The second thing is, once the lift in its parking position, it's locked in place, and you want to descend the lift have to go up a bit to distress the locking mechanism, and then the lift will go down. The time it goes up is a settable time, and that's inside the control box. There is a little timer inside that you can adjust. But right now, we're going to try, first of all, the first lift test. Before we start lifting, make sure that the chain is over the rollers on the hydraulic pistons on both the left and the right hand side. And you need to keep a close eye on the piston which is on the column without the motor. And the reason for that is that it's going to take a little bit more time for the oil to get into the piston. The piston which is closest to the motor will be fed earlier, so it's going to go up. And because of the cable system, both shuttles will lift up. but the piston on the far end side, the one on the column without the motor, may not start lifting. So it's going to take a little bit of time before that starts to lift. And it may be then the chain slips off. So you need to keep an eye on that. That's only the first time. After that, everything will be all right. Inside the control box, you will find the timer, and this is the unlock timer. So that's the timer that will set the time that the lift goes up to de-stress the locking system before the lift goes down again. Now it's set to about 1.2, 1.5 seconds, which is probably good enough. If it is not, then you can adjust it by rotating this knob here. Also in the control box, you will find your main breaker and fuse. Make sure that it's turned on to the up position before you start using it, otherwise it won't really work. So before we do the trial lift, let's have a quick look on the controls. You got an emergency stop, it should be out. If you want to stop it immediately because something is wrong, push the button. Unlock it, and it should be out. If it's depressed in, you cannot start anything. This button here says omhoog, it means lift upwards. This button means lift downwards, and you will see when you push this button, the lift will go up shortly, depending on the timer, and then it will descend. And the last one is actually the parking or the locking position. So if you move the lift up to its position where you want to have it, and you have heard the click, then you let this up switch go, and then you push once the down switch, and then you will hear an audible alarm, and it will park the lift onto the locking system. Don't forget that. On the top of the control box, we have an audible alarm that will beep whenever we're putting the lift in the locking position. And then we of course have the green light indicating that mains is applied. And on the side, you've got your main toggle switch. So let's turn it on and start working. So now I'm going to push the button up and the lift will go upwards. If it's your first time that you do it, keep an eye on that piston on the other side where the motor is not attached to the column, that the chain is still on top of the piston, as I explained before. And then, while the lift is moving up, we're going to listen to the clicks. And the locking clicks should happen exactly at the same time. If not, we need to adjust. So, hopefully you can hear the clicks. So let's give it a try. Did you hear that? Did you hear the click? That column clicked a fraction of a second earlier than that one. Now that means that both shuttles are not on the same height. So I will have to adjust that one. That click came later. So now we need to adjust the cables, and it's not about tension right now, but now it's about leveling out the shuttles. On this shuttle, you see a cable going up. This is a pulling cable. So this shuttle will be pulled up by the other shuttle on the other side. So we know that this side of the shuttle is lower than the other one, and it's about 1.5 centimeters, and I just measured it. And so we need to move the shuttle up by moving this nut upwards, about 2 centimeters. And at the same time, in the back, we have to release that with 2 centimeters. So this is the adjustment that we ought to do. Not very complex, but still something that has to be done. There we go. I just adjusted the shuttle, and it's a very easy mechanism to do it. The shuttle which is too low has to go up a bit, and therefore you need to shorten the cable which is going up. And the cable which is going down on the shuttle, that's the one that you have to make longer. And then tighten it all up, making sure you have the right cable tension, and you should be all set to go. So we adjusted the shuttle which was too low, which was the one on the column without the motor, and now I hope everything should be all right. So we're going to give it a try again, listen for a click at the same time. If it's not, we need to do some more adjustment. I think that the clicks are exactly at the same time, so we are good. And now I'm going to lift it a bit more up, and then I'll park it, and then we'll see how it goes. Now you see it going down, and you hear the audible alarm, and you let it come down until it doesn't move anymore. And now it's resting on the locking system. And now it would be safe to work under the vehicle. I think all this is working just fine, and now I'm going to lower the lift. all the way to the bottom. You'll see that if there's no load on the lift, it's going to lower very slowly. And you will notice that as soon as I lower the lift, it's going to go up a bit and then down. Did you see that? It went up a bit, enough to unlock the mechanism, and now it's going down. But before we put the car up, we still have to put those bolts on this protection panel, so bolt it down to the ground, and use this curtain to cover up this whole area. So I'm going to feed the curtain through the shuttle, and you might find some resistance halfway. So then you might need some kind of a ruler to push it down, because there is this narrow gap halfway. There we go. Feed the hook through it, and then feed both hooks through the holes in the pillar. There we go. All we need to do now is to tighten up the bolts. All right, with everything now in place, and we already have tried lifting a lightweight car, the Lotus Elise, it's only 600 kilograms, that went like a champ. But now we're going to lift a heavier truck. We're going to lift a 4x4 Land Rover Defender 1110. The total weight is near to 2,000 kilograms. So let's see how that's going to go. And now I place it in park, and now it's locked, I hope. Now it's locked. All right, I'm just going to double check if the legs are still good, because that's the first time I lift it. I will do a little inspection of the pillars, making sure everything is still all right, and I see no major issues, so that's pretty good. But as you might have noticed, I've balanced the car out a bit, so the heavy part is closer to the pillar than the rear end, which is the lighter part. And that's just to reduce the leverage on the arms. So I think, yeah, this feels sturdy. So let's push it a bit higher up. Whoops, that's the chain. All right, and it's locked in place. So that seems to work quite nice, and we can work under it. Of course, it's not at the highest point, but I noticed that I still have my pulley all the way on the top, so I would have to remove that one first without damaging the car. If we're going to let it down, it's going to go up a little bit, and then it will descend. There we go. My final conclusion on this 2-column 4-ton lift is that it's a very good and solid lift for the price you pay, and it is CE certified, and the installation of it takes you about 8 hours if you do it carefully. And I've done it for my first time, and it went very smoothly. I had small issues with the instruction manual, especially on the control box where we have the terminal for all the cables. So there was some small changes. Because of the CE certification, they added on security features. But when I contacted ToolMania, everything was sorted out immediately, and I got the proper connection, so we hooked it up. And for the rest, I really had no major issues at all. Everything was complete in the package, so that's good. And really, it looks like really solid and firm quality. I have to say that I had to drill an extra little hole for one of the sensors, in fact for both sensors, the top sensor and the bottom lower sensor, because that one of the holes was not really in the center where it was supposed to be, but I was just getting a little bit of a bigger bit and then just drilled that hole and everything was sorted out. And I think that's quite normal. The other little area where you may have to fiddle a bit is to get the curtain that protects the pillar, you know, this black curtain that we installed through the shuttle. Inside the shuttle, the chain is connected there, and there are some split pins, and they were sticking out a bit, so I had to bend those a bit. But for the rest, this is great. I lifted the car a couple of times and no issue. Now, I have to say one thing about this lift. And I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I was trying to lift the BMW 420i, and they have fixed lifting points, and the arms were too big. I couldn't position the car just to get it lifted. So that's maybe something where you need to look into. Probably would even be better if the arms could be a little bit shorter, but that's about it. I will have to make an adaptation for that, but that's okay. That's not a big deal. But I lifted a Lotus Elise and that worked fine, although the Lotus was not really nicely imbalanced, but that was just because of the lifting points on the Elise are not imbalanced. It's nothing to see with the lift at all. But for the rest, this is a great lift. So if you're fed up with crawling on the floor and using jacks and axle stands, I think a lift like this is something you should get. Thank you for watching, and there's 2 more videos coming. There's one about the maintenance of it, and there's one of the operations and the specifications. And I think ToolMania really scored with this lift. Bye-bye.